All right. Good morning, GPAR. Happy Monday morning. It could be gray out there, but I think the sun is shining from the baseball gods. We are so happy to see so many of you with us this morning. We have one of our great presenters over the last couple of years, and that's Bill Dare from Spotlight Home Inspection. We're so fortunate to have him with us. We did this last year, scary home inspections, a little play off of Halloween. And Bill is going to go through a number of things to help you understand home inspections from his side of things and what his team and his shop do day in and day out, and illustrate their want and desire to help you guys get the transaction finalized and not try to throw roadblocks into it, even though sometimes that kind of feels that way. But he's going to give you his professional perspective. He is well respected within the industry, and in addition to that, he will testify as an expert witness on these types of matters. So it really goes to his breadth of experience and knowledge. So we're really fortunate to have him as both an affiliate member, but then also to contributing his time here with us. The only thing better than a Bill Dare home inspection workshop is a Bill Dare home inspection workshop the day after the Phillies clinch the National League pennant. Awesome day in Philadelphia. I think, Bill, we're going to need to get you down to Citizens Bank Park, because definitely it's a house of horrors for the opposition when they come into town. We got to check out our home and make sure that it's still the scary place that it is. So with that, Bill, let's get into scary home inspections. Good morning.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt, for that great introduction. Again, I'm not a huge sports fan, but I definitely enjoyed watching the game last night. And I'm surprised that we've got, 20 people that are still awake and available for a meeting. So I appreciate all you guys taking the time to jump on this presentation. I've got a PowerPoint, which I've sent over to GPAR, so it's available to you. I'm telling you that everything in here is ours, is Spotlight, so you can share it, post it. There's no limitation on it, any of the pictures or images. So with that, we're going to jump into this this PowerPoint and get my ugly mug off the screen. That should be. Matt, are you seeing that okay?
Not yet, Bill. Not yet.
Oh, hold on. Let's see. Share.
There we go.
Now we're going to go to this. Now we're good?
Yes, we are.
All right, awesome. So again, we're grateful to Greater Philadelphia Association of Realtors for the opportunity to jump in here and talk to you guys about them things. I think that great agents are just as familiar with the inspection process as most good inspectors are, but we like to turn the knob a little bit sometimes and show you some directions. We're going to talk a little bit about what a good inspection will do for you today in a means of making it less scary, and the idea of making it less scary. So a little bit about me. I've been in real estate my entire adult life. I'm now very old. And when I was 22, we were still living in a mobile home. We bought our first duplex, and we owned almost 100 units, 70 some odd units at one point. And so I maintained all those, and that's how I kind of cut my teeth into this. There isn't anything that I haven't owned, screwed up, and fixed multiple times. So when I got out of my prior life about 20 years ago, I decided that the inspection industry was a great place, and I love every minute of this. I'm enthusiastic about it, even to this day after 20 years. I do it for free, but I don't have to. So I like what I do. You guys are always welcome to email me or call me with any questions or concerns. I'm going to give you my cell phone number at the end. You can text me pictures. So it's always a good time.
Hey, Bill.
Yes,
how about if I do my screen share so we can make your PowerPoint a little bigger?
Okay.
How's that?
Stop share. All right. Are you good? You use the PowerPoint, not the PDF, because there's a video that doesn't work.
Okay.
I don't know why that was small. There's a way to do this, and I apologize.
Hey, it's Monday morning. It's okay.
So I got a wide screen and it takes up the whole screen. So anyway, we can talk and we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So the next slide was basically about the Phillies and the Eagles, and I'm not sure where I live anymore. So there we go. Great. Everybody can see that okay? So next slide. Can I do that? No, I think you have to do that. All right. So anyway, to beat a dead horse here, we're going to hear about this for the next weeks until Friday. I guess this is the first game of the World Series, so we're excited for that. The Eagles are undefeated. I guess I heard they're 10-point favored to win the next game this coming weekend. They were on a bye week, and the Flyers are in second place. I guess the 76ers are just getting rolling, so not my thing. All right, next slide. So I want to say that in the world of real estate, we're your second greatest asset. And I like to say second greatest because you're your greatest asset. Somebody told me once a long time ago that it'll never be wasted to invest in yourself or bet on yourself. So you're your greatest asset. And I firmly believe that if you're energetic, if you push the envelope and do the right things, it's always going to pay off. But the second greatest asset that I believe we have in the real estate realm is a great inspector. And there are others besides us, I know. But in general, these are some general guidelines. We don't scare your clients. That's just not the thing to do. He or she, the inspector, informs and educates, doesn't make something out of nothing. I used to be on a national board for inspectors, and I used to inspect real estate inspection reports, and it was amazing to me how much they made a big deal out of something that was really simple. Explains the issues in a way your client understands them, offers the agent, and in cases of pre-listing inspections, significant buffering from liability. We're going to talk a little bit about pre-listings in a minute, but the agent that we're going to talk about waiving inspections through here, but an inspection from a quality company that has the proper insurance and licensing and all that offers you a significant amount of buffering from liability. He or she is always available for follow-up. We think that that's critical to be able to jump on a conference call with the inspector after you get the report. It has the tools and the manpower and the know-how. It's a one-stop shop. You make one call, even if they don't technically do it. Like, we don't do septic and we don't do well, but that's transparent to you. We bring those people in. It has adequate insurance to cover you. Our insurance actually steps up and covers you and your broker if there was something to arise out of an inspection that we perform, and is fair and unbiased. I think that's really critical. We're not supposed to come in there and tear the place apart. We're supposed to be fair and unbiased, and it's just as important that we get it right for the seller as we do for the buyer, because we can aggravate the seller to a point where they're not going to do business with you, and it just pisses them off. So we don't want to do that either. Go ahead, Matt, next. The trend, which is waning, I will say, to waive inspections. The failure to disclose cases are significantly on the rise. There's been a couple things, I think we cover them in a minute here, that state that from PAR. I'm seeing it on my end. It's a lot of what I deal with is the legal aspects of this. So my guys are in the field doing inspections. I do a lot of consulting work and expert witness. Buyers feel cheated or misled. If you think about it, they bought a house at the peak of the market. They paid more for that house than it had ever listed for in most cases. And they feel like when they get in there, they're disenfranchised, disenchanted. They likely paid over asking. Obviously, the agent, you knew everything that was wrong with the house. And it's the agent's idea to waive contingencies. That should never be our idea, by the way. I'm sure that most of you have been, that's been covered. That if they're going to waive inspections, the client should sign off on that. That wasn't your idea. There are some companies out there we're starting to see for the last 8 or 9 months that have started to capitalize on this this whole idea and putting people into a really strange situation where their reports are really over the top and flat out incorrect in many cases, in an attempt to get the buyer into litigation against other people because they get paid as an expert. So I like to say that when you guys want to sue somebody, only the lawyers and the experts win in most cases. This has led buyers to unwarranted litigation. I've been involved in some of these cases where I look at the report and there's very little in it that is factual. It's just inflammatory. I will say for sure, things are starting to return to normal. Matt and I were talking briefly. We are basically fully booked this week. We have a little bit of availability on Friday. So it is getting back to normal, which is a great thing. But I do think that home inspection should be an inherent right. They shouldn't be something you have to waive or not waive. All right, Matt, next. So we'll talk a little about in this presentation what a home inspection is. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that. What are some of the scary problems that we see on inspections, and great inspectors and not so great ones we're going to talk about a little bit. What does the age of the home have to do with it? Strategies to keep your client from being frightened, and some PAR documents on the importance of inspection. So that's kind of the outline of what we're going to cover today. So the state home inspection law, like 114, is passed about 2000, I think. Talks a lot about how we are supposed to be unbiased as inspectors. We're not allowed to have any financial interest in the property, and we are not allowed to pay for referrals or get paid for inspections from anybody but the client. I think there's some magical words in this that need to be better defined in most cases. The state requires us to be looking for material defects, and that's an actual word that should be in your report as an inspector. And the state says that that's anything that's not operating as it was designed that would negatively impact the value of the house in a significant way or put the occupants at unreasonable risk. We're not there to nitpick the house. We're not there to renegotiate the sales price. Unfortunately, in my humble opinion, this leaves a lot to interpretation. What's the word significant and unreasonable mean? So we set that expectation at the beginning of the inspection. In most cases, there's 1,000 to 2,000 to repair. Yeah, if it's more than that, then we'll consider it a material defect. If it's less than that, it's just part of buying a used house. On a multi-million-dollar house, this may raise to $5,000 or $10,000. Obviously, it's calibrated based on, you know, people's ability to pay. So the guy with buying a $6 million house is not real worried about a $10,000 problem. Safety's easy. If it's unsafe, it's a material defect. Pretty much no matter the cost, trip hazards, loose or missing railings, missing smoke detectors, just to mention a few of the things we see from a safety standpoint. We're going to talk about mold in a little bit. Go ahead. A good inspector should set all the expectations. You should take the pressure off of you to try to explain what the home inspector is going to do. So a good inspector is going to set those expectations with the client right in the beginning. The inspection is of readily available components, systems in a property. We're not allowed to dig through things, cut things open. We cannot see through walls. We cannot cut open walls. We cannot predict the future. Inspectors should open access covers if possible. While we're not required to take the electrical panel cover off, I think any good inspector takes that off. And same thing with the HVAC units and attic and knee wall accesses. As long as they're not painted shut and caulked in tight, we're going to go in those areas. You should, as I said in the beginning, those expectations should be set by the inspector in the beginning so the client understands it. And the inspection really should be almost, if not more, about an education of the house than about finding out what's wrong with it. It's important to find out what's wrong, but it's also very important that the people understand the house when they buy it. Go ahead, Matt. So some of the scary problems we've got some pictures of these. I mean, mold seems to be at the top of the list on a regular basis. We got into mold testing a number of years ago just because I got tired of the mold guys making mountains out of molehills. We don't want mold growing in the house. I'm not saying that for a moment, but it's not uncommon to find it. And it's the big deal is not that, you know, we have mold. It's what are we going to do about it? Water intrusion in a basement or through the roof is obviously a big problem. Structural, and again, I have slides for all these here in a minute. Structural problems, pests, mice, bees, termites, electrical issues, plumbing problems, deck concerns, and roofs. Those are some of the biggest, scariest things. And some of them are not scary because they're super expensive to fix, but because they're safety concerns. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Go ahead. So mold's everywhere. It easily grows on most building materials. The EPA has a really good website on mold. I like it because they're not trying to sell you anything or scare you into hiring anyone. Basically, the mold says, the EPA says you can clean most mold problems by soap and water. They don't even like the bleach thing. But first you have to address the moisture, the source of moisture. Now, in the case of the paneling on the right there, there's not a lot of options but to remove that and throw it away. You're not going to clean that. And then on the roof deck, it's unfortunate. I believe that was a fairly new roof and they didn't find that problem. But most of the times when we find mold in the attic, our pitch to the client is, look, it's there, but you don't breathe that air typically. It's going up and out the ridge vent. So you need to calibrate all that. But so first you got to deal with the moisture. And then secondly, I like to refer to the EPA for guidance on cleanup. Go ahead, Matt. Excuse me. This is on the back of drywall in a basement. Very common problem. You'll see the black down at the bottom, but if you look up closer to the top, you see the yellow. So it, you know, mold comes in many different colors and shapes and sizes. So that's moldy all the way up to about the 3.5 foot mark. Sheetrock with mold on it just needs to be thrown away. We can't really clean it. I mean, you can paint over it maybe, but it should really be disposed of. Go ahead. Up there in between the floor joists, you see that greenish bluish color. That was likely on those boards. This is a house built in like the 1950s that has the pine tongue and groove flooring subfloor. And that was almost certainly on those boards when that house was built. That didn't grow there. So that's an important distinction to make for the client and the person needing to understand what to do about it. So if the mold has grown there since the house was built, we've got a moisture issue that we have to contend with. It may simply be installing a dehumidifier or doing something more serious about moisture intrusion. But in the case of this particular type of mold on the floor, on the subfloor, it was almost certainly there when the house was built. So it needs to be dealt with, but it's not something that we're tackling moisture issues in the basement. Now, on the sides, you'll see on the right floor joist in particular, you see some white stuff. And that's likely penicillin or aspergillus on that floor joist. That is more of a moisture problem. It also needs to be dealt with. But again, most of the time the EPA is saying just clean it up with soap and water. There are paints out there, mold encapsulating paints. Zinsser makes one called Mold Killing Primer, Foster's 4020. There are some things you can do to paint over it to deal with it. Again, there are points. I'm going to show you one here. A lot of this stuff I think can be handled by the average consumer without too much drama if they're comfortable with it. But that's something you guys need to determine. This is where a pre-listing inspection comes into play. If you're doing a pre-listing inspection, we can manage this a lot easier than when the buyer sees it and the home inspector makes a big deal out of it, and then you've got other bigger problems. Go ahead. Underneath the sinks is a really common place to find mold problems. So, you know, it's usually because a drain leaked at one point in the past. A good inspector is going to jump in there with a moisture meter and find out if it's an ongoing problem or a past problem. Go ahead, Matt. This was new construction. We did a pre-drywall inspection on this house. I've shown the slide before. They were not considering these to be a problem. This was a huge issue for us. They had an engineer come out and declared that this was okay. We have to acquiesce to the engineer. We just put that letter in our file so that if and when this ever becomes a bigger problem, we've got it. I believe they cleaned it somehow. They had somebody come in and clean it, but I think the wood was compromised. That was my impression, but that's a pretty big problem right there. That we only really found because of a pre-listing inspection, or excuse me, pre-drywall during construction. A lot of that would not have been visible once the sheetrock and insulation is installed. Good. This gets to be the problem that I think you need a professional. And no, that's not a black wainscoting at the bottom. That's actually where the water stops rising in this basement. So this is beyond what I would consider consumer level mold, dealing with mold. This needs a professional. This needs a lot of care. Likely this has spread throughout the house, and it's black mold, which is usually a somewhat more of a concern than the white Aspergillus penicillin, which is really common. Next. Water intrusion is always a hassle. Sometimes it gets to be a real problem to fix. Most of the time, and this is borne out after many, many years of doing this and having people go crazy with moisture problems, only to find out that they had just extended the downspout to the right. You see the downspouts just dropping at the foundation. There's some technical reasons for this, but if you just get the water 3 or 4 feet from the house past the overdig, a lot of times that's all that's needed to deal with the moisture in the basement. If it's blocked, like you see to the left, that's a really porous product, and you really need to mind the water on the outside. Poured concrete can leak as well, but it generally only leaks through cracks, and those cracks are fairly easily sealed. But obviously, sometimes you'll need a professional, but I think it's crazy. I see these guys walking out of the basement with a $25,000 water treatment or water intrusion plan, that involves all kinds of trauma, but they never dealt with the downspouts outside. So more often than not, if you put the downspouts away from the house, it's going to solve the problem, or at least make it very manageable. Structural issues. I always love when I see stuff cut. That's a rafter that they cut through for that recessed light. What's the scariest thing to a home inspector is a joke in our industry. It's a plumber with a Sawzall. So, we can't just cut through stuff, couldn't it? This was a property. This was actually one of my properties, one of my rentals. And they called me one night early, late at night, and they were like, yeah, the basement wall fell in. And they were right, it had. That was a serious structural problem. But what was really interesting to me, and what this picture bears out, is that whole back wall of that house fell away. And look at the siding, it's straight as an arrow. It's pretty amazing what a building will endure in a lot of cases, but that's obviously, that was an old stone foundation problem. Good. This was a really expensive house on the main line. Actually, it was in West Conshohocken, sorry. That steel beam you see sitting on that little 2x4 triangle should have extended and sat on the wall. That little 2x4 triangle is nothing. And this was way back in some cavernous crawl space that we had to get into to go find that. So yeah, that house, that construction was there for I think this house was old. The house was old. The house was built in the 20s. But this addition, I think, was more about 10 or 12 years ago. So got to get in those crawl spaces. Good. This is a famous one. We see it all the time. It's in the garage. They wanted to put a garage door opener in, and they had to cut through the beam. And to be honest, that little angle iron that they bolted on there isn't doing much of anything. But again, this is not all that difficult to fix. It just needs to be addressed, and so a good inspector is going to calibrate this and say, yeah, it needs to get corrected. Probably $500 or $1,000, just so that the client can kind of calibrate it in their own mind what it's going to take to correct it. Good. Broken trusses are really common. This is a roof truss in an attic. They get really manhandled in construction and delivery, so it's not uncommon to find. Again, it's a relatively simple fix. It seems dramatic, but generally speaking, it's not a huge deal to fix it. They just typically sister 2x4s on either side of the break and glue them and screw them in place. technically an engineer or the manufacturer is supposed to design and repair. Good. This is, we didn't inspect this building. I happened to be sitting there and waiting for somebody to come back to the truck. I just took a picture of this. This is, this is a really bad foundation issue on a barn. That has passed the moment of stability. So that's going to fall away here any minute, but that's something that needs to be addressed if we're going to do an inspection on that property. Go ahead. Really common problem, the staircase going down into the basement, that wall to the right, the water soaks in behind that, and when it freezes, it pushes on that wall, which has very little reinforcing. It'll probably look that way for 20 more years, but obviously that looks scary from this point and needs to be addressed at some level, sooner or later. This was a commercial property. Obviously, it had been repaired once before, and the repair wasn't adequate, and it was breaking again. I actually got out of that attic fairly quickly because I didn't want to be there anymore with that. It looked like it was about to go the rest of the way. Good, Matt. These are some really determined termites. You can see the termite tubes hanging down from the framing. Termites don't really care for older wood. There's not a lot of moisture in it. Stuff that's old growth and has been in, this house was older, and so they were trying to find someplace else to be. But that was one of the more spectacular pictures that I got of termites trying to make their way, because they can't be in the air. They have to build themselves shelter tubes wherever they go, and they were just looking around for something better. Bats, it's amazing how many bats we get to see. They can come through something the size of a nickel, they tell me, or a quarter. They can come through a really small space. I would say that it's hardly a month goes by that we don't encounter at least one bat in the attic. You can see it up there in the peak. So they obviously they're hard to get rid of. They are a protected species, so there are seasons in the year when, if you find them, you have to leave them there until the date passes, and then you can exclude them from the space. So bats are really a pain to deal with because of their protected species status. Go ahead, Matt. I don't know where this was my picture, but I can't remember the circumstances, but obviously the squirrel had a better day the day before, maybe. But finding that kind of stuff in an attic, we find live squirrels in attics a lot. The flying squirrels seem to be the most persistent. So and they get in places where it's really hard to see. They go up underneath it, above the gutter and below the shingle, and so they can be a real hassle to deal with, and at times it's hard to find them. So just knowing that they exist and have to look for them as an inspector is kind of a pain in the neck, but that's the job. Go ahead, Matt. Electrical issues. This is knob and tube. Those white porcelain pillars you see sticking down from the rafter and up from the ceiling joists are where the original knob and tube was run, but you see all these different things that happened to it. Knob and tube kind of went out in the late 20s, but in the time since then, everybody and their mother decided they're going to just tie into the knob and tube, and that's what all these connections are. And that's really my biggest fear with knob and tube, is what we don't know, what's happening behind the walls, and all the modifications that occurred over the years to it that was never designed to handle. In and of itself, it was actually a pretty good system. They're all soldered connections, it's 20 amp circuits, but there's no ground, and the insulation by now is basically deteriorated to the point where pretty much nobody, when I first got in this business, we couldn't look the other way with knob and tube a little bit. I'm sorry. Nowadays, it's knob and tube's got to go. It ran its course. This was a water heater I had the other day. I thought it was really fun. There was a leak in the top of the water heater that it got the insulation wet, and that created a short circuit, and it burned through that plastic cover and was creating a significant hazard, both from electrical shock, because that metal housing now is energized. Go ahead and click the next slide. Hopefully this video will play. But I got some cool video of it down the bottom. That is there a play button?
Nah.
All right. Well, trust me, the sparks are flying out of the insulation. So that was kind of a scary thing. You can see the soot on the side of the opening. That's what led me to look inside of there. So yeah, electricity and water do not play well together. They're a scary mix. That's our theme today, scary. This is scary. This is a summer winter hookup on a steam system. I don't know if you remember in science class, but water at sea level boils about 212 degrees Fahrenheit. That says 209.3 degrees coming out of the faucet. And that is an instantaneous second to third degree burn. Had somebody put their hand under there, especially a little kid. This was a serious problem. This was a steam boiler system with a summer winter hookup and no tempering valve. So that's some scary stuff. So we do check water temperatures. Any good home inspector should really, if there's any question at all, should check the water temperature. But that was one of the scariest ones I had. That was my record. We found a lot of them in the high, 180, 190, which is still crazy. Cast iron drain. This is a cast iron sewer line in a crawl space. This is the most, this is the least gross picture of this particular problem that I could take and still get the point across. Our opinion on cast iron generally is that it's fairly well run its course on a horizontal. The vertical lines going up through the house don't tend to be as problematic because the water doesn't stay in them very long. But the horizontal runs have become really problematic. We're seeing a lot more issues. If you have a client buying a house that's that's 70, 80 years old, it probably behoove you to recommend a sewer lateral scope going out through the yard. We're just finding more and more problems with cast iron. And then if the property is vacant for any length of time, cast iron doesn't like not being used. It tends to create problems when they start using it again. Sometimes it's as simple as getting it snaked out. Sometimes it's a serious issue that needs to have the sewer line replaced. So we're very mindful of looking for problems in cast iron. And if we find we're concerned at all about where it runs from the house to the street, we're going to recommend a sewer lateral scope. But cast iron has become really, now I got to say, I'll give you guys some credit. Philadelphia for a long time had they probably still have a really strong plumbers union, and they required cast iron to be installed in Philly, which new cast iron is not nearly the problem that older stuff is. So if you've got a house that was constructed in the last 20 or 30 years and it has cast iron in it, I don't have a concern because it's newer. It's the stuff that was put in back in the 20s and 30s and 40s that has become problematic. I like this picture because my science teacher told me it took like 1,000 years to grow an inch of stalactite and stalagmite. I suppose if you put some soap in the equation, it advances. This house was only about 10 or 12 years old. And that's from the shower drain, a leak in the shower. Again, back in a crawl space. Nobody knew this was back there until we walked back there and took a look around. So, getting in a crawl space is kind of a really critical component to a good inspection. So getting back there is really important. Go ahead. Decks. This was the funniest deck picture I could come up with because a lot of the problems that we see with decks don't photograph well, but they're seriously important. We've had a lot of issues recently. By recently, I mean the last 10 or 12 years with poorly treated, pressure treated wood. We've had serious concerns with pressure treated wood not performing as expected in decks. So we've had a lot of rotted deck wood that didn't hold up as expected, and deck attachments are really a concern where they attach to the house. So we're always mindful of this. This was just kind of a funny picture that someone used a floor jack to kind of hold the deck in place, which that's not permitted, obviously. Excuse me. Roofs. This was a really bad roof. I always find it funny. If you ask a roofer if you need a new roof, the answer is yes. When you ask them, how do they know that? They said, well, if you're asking me, you need a new roof. Well, don't you want to come and see it? Don't need to see it. You need a new roof. This roof was not leaking as bad as it looks. Roofs actually don't leak a lot in the field. They leak at the penetrations, mostly where the pipes come through or where they intersect with a chimney or a wall. Because the material has to completely fail in most cases, or a nail has to come up through the shingle. So most roofs will last longer than anybody anticipates, the actual roofing material. The other things tend to break down much sooner. The penetrations where the sewer pipes and stuff go out, they deteriorate rather quickly. So usually within about 10 or 12 years, they need to be replaced. This is a really scary roof. It is really bad. This is what happens when you don't fix your roof. It continues to leak over many years. The structure breaks down and it falls apart. Go ahead, Matt. This is why we need to see roofs. If we can walk them, we're going to walk them. We think that's important. If we cannot walk them, we have drones. Every one of my guys carries a drone, so that if we can't get up there for some reason, or it's unsafe, or there's snow, we can still do the best we can to look at it. This house was not that old, and this was not visible from the ground. These are the ridge cap shingles are missing in the middle of the screen there. So walking on roofs or getting an image of the roof or a series of images is really important. Great inspectors. I got to say, I'm a little biased, I'm sure. I believe every one of my guys has been handpicked and trained personally by me and vetted by me. The state of Pennsylvania says you have to do 100 inspections before you're allowed to do your own without supervision. All my guys had hundreds and hundreds before they ever did their first one. At this point, all of them have been with me for many years and done thousands and thousands of inspections, even on the stucco side. I think it's important to be calm. Sometimes it's hard when you walk around a corner and you see something that you haven't seen ever before, and it's difficult to not go, oh my gosh. But that's important for an inspector to always seem like everything is in stride, everything is expected. You got to connect with the buyer or your client. I think that's critically important, and it's almost, in my opinion, more important than being the most educated inspector on a planet. I think the ability to connect with your client is critical, because that's going to give them the comfort that they got the information they need. They had the opportunity to ask questions. That's the next thing, solicits questions. We do it at every turn. So before we go, after we do the outside, do you have any questions? Before we come up out of the basement, do you have any questions? We want that person to have been asked at least 4 or 5 times during the inspection if they had any questions. I think it's important to educate. We talked about that earlier, to explain how things work, and how to shut things off in an emergency, how to change the air filter in the heating system if it has one. You know, how long do things typically last? So all those things are really important, because again, we're potentially dealing with somebody that doesn't know anything about home ownership in the case of first-time buyers. I think it's important that the inspector takes their time, be patient. I never want my client to think that we were rushing through it to get through it in time. Just as often as we present a problem, we should be presenting the potential solution. Not that we're even allowed to work on a house for 12 months after we inspect it. Excuse me. I think it's important that you discuss with the client, here's the problem, here's what they'll probably want to do to fix it, and approximately here's what the cost is going to be to fix it, so that they can calibrate that. When you say that there's a floor joist in the basement that needs to be sistered, they're thinking, well, that's a structural problem. It may be, you know, a lot of money to fix, and in most cases, it's $400 or $500 to sister a floor joist. So we want them to calibrate these things and understand them. And that's supposed to say indefinitely. I think that we should be readily available, you know, 6 months, 6 years, 6 days after the inspection, for any kind of consultation, because we're the best source of that information. We're not trying to sell you anything. We're not a construction company. We don't do any of that stuff. So we're a good source for that. Well dressed, I think, is important. My guys are all required to wear khakis and a button-down shirt. We want to make you look like a pro for recommending us. If that client doesn't come out of there and go, that's the greatest inspection we ever had, then I've got a problem, call me. He's got the right tools for the job. One of these lawsuits that I'm involved in for failure to disclose, the inspector went through there and made numerous complaints about moisture problems, but didn't have a single moisture reading in the thing because he apparently didn't have moisture. The answer to the question is we do inspect appliances. We turn them all on to the extent that we can. I think that's important. We check for safety things like anti-tip devices. We run the oven, we run the cooktop, we run the fan. We run the heater and air conditioner if it's not too cold out. So yes, I think all that's really critical. We don't typically run the washing machine anymore. First off, it's generally as is. We'll run the dryer and make sure it gets hot. But my problem with the washing machine is too many things go wrong when you run a washing machine, and I just don't know. But if the client asks us to, we'll probably run it. But generally speaking, we don't start that way. But yeah, appliances are critical. Go ahead. The age of the house is really plays a huge role in the complexity of the inspection. Not counting for, the $8.2 million, 7 heating and cooling systems and, and all the other complexity that goes into really high-end houses, which we do a lot of. The age of the house on a typical house plays a huge role in it. And the complexity of the inspection, the time it takes to do the inspection, in our case, the cost of the inspection goes up when the age goes up. So anything built before the 1930s can have knob and tube wiring, asbestos insulation, and lead-based paint. Homes built in the 40s through the 50s can have ungrounded cloth wiring, asbestos and lead. And asbestos siding was kind of popular in those times, although asbestos siding is not really a huge concern even today. We just don't want the person coming back to say they didn't understand that they had asbestos siding, but most of the time you can still bag up and dispose of asbestos siding. Most homes built in the 60s are fairly solid, have been maintained. The lead-based paint is still a possibility up until 1978, but most of those other materials, the knob and tube and the asbestos, were kind of out of favor by that point. So while it's possible to kind of find that, not knob and tube, but it's possible to find asbestos in a 1960s house, it's not very common. At times you'll be on an inspection, whether it's your listing or your client and they hire another guy, another inspector. And sometimes I believe inspectors go way too far. Reading your client is a really critical piece of any good inspector's ability, and his toolkit is the ability to look at people and realize if they're getting freaked out. So if the inspector's going off the rails, it's not a great idea to contradict them per se, but you can ask some leading questions that'll help your buyer calm down a little bit. And you can ask him, so when he's going off about something, you ask, can it be repaired? Well, of course it can be repaired. Everything can be repaired. If you feel the inspector might even know, you could ask him what he thinks it's going to cost, because he could be waxing eloquent for 5 minutes about something that costs $150. So we don't want to do that. You can ask him if he sees this often. I got to tell you, the most busy inspectors don't see something new very often. We see it regularly. So when we see a problem, we see it a lot typically. So, if he's going all crazy about something, you can say, do you see this often? Oh yeah, I see this every week. Oh, okay. So it's not that uncommon. Christina, we strongly recommend, this is an answer to a chat, we strongly recommend that the agent attend the inspection for a number of reasons. I think you'll learn something about the house you didn't know. It'll be easier for you to understand the report. It allows you to build more of a relationship with your clients. You're going to spend 2 to 3 hours at the house with them. And it gives you the opportunity to connect with the inspector after it if you have any concerns or questions. But we believe that as long as you're not going to contradict the inspector, because that just puts you in an awkward spot, because remember, you're the person that's going to try to get them to the closing table, so that could be misconstrued sometimes. But I love when agents come. We want you to be involved in the process. We're going to give you kudos for coming. We're going to tell people this is great that the agent showed up. Assure the buyer that you will do your best to address their concerns. This is like, again, once they get the report, or once they know that this report is coming, you're gonna just tell them, look, we're gonna work through this together. Don't worry about it. Let's get the report and we'll deal with it. One of the things I do a lot of is, and I don't charge anything for this, you can always send me reports of any type, and I'm happy to deal with them and talk about them, review them, and tell you what I think about it. I'm willing to get on a conference call with your client if you think you've got something that may not be totally accurate. Don't downplay the inspector's findings. Let him hang on that noose. If he's inaccurate or something, that's his problem, not yours, unless you say unless you contradict him. And don't hesitate to ask those leading questions to, as stated above, to kind of bring some parameters to the problem that he's going on and on about. And again, a good inspector should focus as much on the client as he does on the house. Most of us that have been doing this for a long time can inspect most houses very easily. It's not a very difficult thing, except, at my age, crawling in crawl spaces and attics isn't any fun anymore. But generally speaking, it's a simple process, and we should be making sure that we're paying attention to the client. We tried for a couple of years to try to deliver reports on site, but what I found was the guys were worrying about the report more than they were worried about the client. So we don't deliver reports on site. We try to get them to you that night, if at the latest the next morning. But I don't believe that that's a prudent thing, because I really, really, really want your client to feel like they got everything they needed to out of the report. Go ahead, Matt. I put this, I left this in there. It was in the other one. I left it in there because it's still kind of happening in some real hot spots. I will say that this seems to be waning a great deal. We're not seeing nearly as much of this pressure as was out there. PAR wrote some articles on this. One's linked there. He gives you some ideas about how to make your offer attractive without actually waiving the inspection. One of the most important things is, how will your client remember the decision to forego the inspections? You need to do your best to that you weren't recommending it. So again, I hope this kind of pretty much goes away. The other thing I want to kind of say here, that waiving inspections on a 10-year-old townhouse is much less risky than waiving your inspections on something that's, from built in the 1950s. So there is some decision making that can occur, or at least some logical conversation you can have. And waiving inspections by someone that's a multimillionaire is not quite as dramatic as waiving inspections on somebody that just scraped together every dollar they have to buy their first house. For them to find out that there's a $5,000 or a $10,000 problem in that house after they buy it without them knowing is probably really problematic for them. So we want to protect those people that need protecting, and that's part of what the home inspection process is. We generally tell people that we'd rather see you waive $10,000 of the inspection problem than to waive the inspection. So you'll accept the first 10, 5, whatever you can afford to try to get it through. But there are some things that need to be done. But I get it. I've gotten the call many times. My clients have tried to get inspections on these houses, and they're on their 6th offer, and they keep getting turned down because they call inspections. We do what's called a walk and talk. I'm not a big fan of them. We do them because in some cases it's all you can get. So it's basically, we're going to come out at the showing with your client and spend, whatever time we can get there, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, to get a quick look at the house and at least give them some idea what they're dealing with. It's not It's not a full inspection. We do it a little differently than most. We'll issue a report and we sign a contract with you. So there's a relationship between us and the client. We strongly recommend after that the house get inspected as soon as possible. If they go to closing, then not long after the closing, we do a full inspection so we know what we're dealing with. But that's kind of become a necessary evil, in my opinion. I'm not a big fan, but we do them because it's all you can get sometimes. Go ahead, Matt. So Parr wrote an article, Hank Lerner. It discusses the 40% or so increase in buyer-seller mediation requests. Parr, it's all about the inspections. There are other inspections available. I got to say they're limited at best. The municipal inspections and the information only inspections is kind of a misnomer. They were popular for about a millisecond until everybody realized that it's not really for inspection information purposes only, because if there's anything really wrong, the people are going to find a way to bail out. So they're not even being allowed that much anymore. I would say that that's more of a, we'll waive the first $10,000 or $20,000 of problems rather than that, because if it's something really significantly wrong, you know those people are going to find a way out. But they do exist. They're out there. I guess another note I forgot to mention, we're not sneaking in on a listing. We're not going to go in as your uncle. It has to be fully disclosed. So if we go in for a walk and talk it, and if they're not going to allow it, then we're not going, because I just don't think that's right either, to show up on a listing as your uncle to do a walkthrough. So we'll do it as long as the listing agent's okay with it. You've got to report. Remember, good inspectors, I don't care if they're with our company or the company, if they're any good, they're going to be available to walk your client through the report if they have any questions. A lot of times when they see it in print, it doesn't seem the same to them as what they got on site. Excuse me. So I think it's important to be able to have the client and the inspector and possibly you get on a conference call so that everybody can ask their questions and get it understood better. Let the inspector take the risk of explaining their report. Don't you go trying to explain it really unless you were there and you fully understand the situation. Remember, anything that you do like that puts you more at risk. Let the inspector take that risk. We've got insurance for it. It's our liability. We don't want you to go out on a limb and get into trouble because you said something that wasn't correct. And again, so remember, the client's not entitled to everything in the report. We set that parameter at the inspection for you because obviously the client wants everything, but that's not what the state law says. We're just dealing with, according to the state of Pennsylvania, we're only dealing with material defects in the real estate transaction. Everything else is just informational. Pre-listing. These are becoming, increasingly popular. I will say that before the pandemic, we were doing a lot of them, but not as many as we are now. Before the pandemic, we were saying that 50 to 60% of the homes that we pre-list inspect do not go through an inspection. The people accept the inspection for what it is. We don't pull any punches. It's the same inspection that we would do for the buyer if they hired us. And in post-pandemic world, we're seeing 80% plus of people waiving inspections because they're just so grateful to have anything because they were afraid they were going to have to waive inspections altogether. But now they have an inspection report. You have the ability on a pre-listing to address the concerns on your own terms, not 6 weeks before closing with somebody else dictating the terms. And this is really important because of what I'm involved in most of the time, you limit the liability of both your buyer, your seller, and yourself. So if the sellers and the buyer get into a tussle about something, we're going to be in the middle of that because they're going to be complaining to us why we didn't find it rather than saying to you, you knew about it and didn't tell me about it. So the buffer of liability that a home inspection in general brings to the equation is significant and can't be overlooked. I've never had a buyer that would take $10,000 for a $10,000 problem. They always want that plus a trip to Disney. So, you know, doing it ahead of time, I kind of like to say it's like knowing where the speed trap is before you get there in case, instead of after you get there. So we're happy to be involved in those discussions. Excuse me. Go ahead, Matt. A little commercial for us. We give you 120-day warranty, whether it's a pre-listing or a home inspection. It's through a warranty company. Like all warranty companies, they seem to be limited. It's the best one I could find. Single call or email does it all. We take care of everything. Just tell us what you want. We offer a strong follow-up like we discussed. We review everybody's report for you if you want. That's something I personally do for you. So if you email me something to say, Bill, what do you think of this? I'm happy to look at it. On my end, on the building envelope side of things, we do a lot of consulting for re-siding of houses and work for a lot of builders for helping them develop their scope of work. So we're happy to look at anybody's scope of work if they're saying, we need a new roof and the roofer gave us this bid. What do you think about it? I'm happy to look at that and tell you what I think. We do sleep a little bit once in a while, but we're pretty well available. We do a single point inspection. So if you've got one thing in the house that you think needs to be looked at, we charge a flat $250 for it to go look at a roof or a heater or the floor or the attic. So we do offer that because I think there's sometimes that we need to just go look at one thing for you for some reason. And so we do offer that now. We've got a strategic alliance with a handyman and an insurance company and numerous contractors, so we can help put this together. Go ahead, Matt. That's my cell number. If you've got a question or a problem, call me, send me a text, shoot me a picture. Do not call that number, please, to schedule inspections. The girls in the office get really mad. So just, but if you have something that you need personal attention on, that's my cell. You can reach me anytime, anywhere, basically. And I'm always happy to look at a picture and tell you what I think about it. If it's something serious or not so serious, or if you've got a report or got a question that you need help with, call me. I'm always available. And that's my hour.
All right, Bill, great presentation. Hey, before we did something and you focused specifically on stucco, and today, not so much stucco talk. So in a short amount of time, any thoughts on stucco?
I've got a lot of thoughts. That's a whole nother hour. But we've got a serious stucco problem. It's really bad in Philadelphia, to be honest. Philly was a little late to the game. The suburbs were a little quicker. Moisture gets behind it, and this is true of veneer stone as well. I want to be clear, water can get behind any siding and create problems, but stucco and veneer stone are more problematic because they're less forgiving. So we can do invasive testing. If you go on our website, we've got a whole section dedicated to videos on how a stucco inspection occurs, what the problems are, why we have it. If you guys want to get together, I'm happy, get 2 or 3 agents together. I'll buy you guys lunch. We'll sit down, we talk about anything you want to talk about. So if you want to take this to the next level, always happy for that. But moisture intrusion behind stucco, our fail rate in Philly up until recently was 100%. There wasn't a single stucco installed job in Philadelphia over wood. Now, some of the older houses, obviously, the stucco over brick or stucco over masonry are not problematic. It's only when we have something built in the last 25 or 30 years with stucco that we've had a problem. We finally just found one the other day that didn't have a problem. That broke our 100% fail record. But yeah, no, stucco is a really huge problem. So that's that. But that's like.
And we have a great video in the library from when Bill was with us, and it's all focused on stucco. So check that out on our YouTube channel. Got a couple of quick questions here in the chat. Do you put price ranges on all items in your report? No,
the state doesn't like it. If you want a couple of things, we're not supposed to do it. If you have several things that you want in the report, 3, 4, 5 things, we're happy to add them to you. If you just ask us, say, hey, I need prices on these few things. We do offer a service where they'll put a line item on everything in the report. I think it's $65, but they'll basically take the report, run it through some AI and some actual humans, and spit out a line item. And I found it to be fairly accurate. I was pretty impressed. I don't really care for it because of the totaling is on the front. So the front number is like a line item for every single thing in a report, which can get a little large. You as the agent can go on and edit that list. So you can say only include 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever things. And it'll spit out an estimate for all that stuff. But I find it difficult and aggravating for the seller sometimes if we come in there and say all these things. But again, we're always happy to you pick out the first 5 or 6 things that really bug you that you want prices on, we'll do it, no problem, no charge. If you want a line item for everything we offer, the office can set you up with that. Once we do the report, they just take our report and run it through.
And then one last question from the chat. Can you quickly explain the warranty that comes with the inspection?
Sure, it's on the website. There's the brochure. So it's a 120-day warranty through CP warranty. It's kind of like American Home Shield, all those warranties. It covers for things that are broken. Obviously, if we say it's bad in the inspection report, it's not going to be covered. But we had one the other day where the blower motor went bad on a unit several weeks after the inspection, and the insurance company stepped up and took care of it. So it's not great. I don't really care for warranties. I resisted the temptation to and we pay for them. They're not free. You don't pay for them. The client doesn't pay for them, but we cover them in our cost. But it's the best one I could find. And it covers, excuse me, it covers the house 120 days. So if you do a pre-listing inspection and the settlement's 90 days out, you've got coverage through the delivery and for the first few weeks of the new owner. So it covers things, the normal things, like the AC goes down, the compressor needs to be repaired, the stove stops working, dryer stops working, all those kind of things are what's covered in it. But there's a brochure on the website if you want to look at it. It gives you a detailed description, or just email me and I'll get you a copy of it.
All right, great job, Bill. Thank you for sharing your expertise and your knowledge with us. It was a great hour. Thanks to all of our GPAR members for joining us today. So glad to see so many of you, and have a great day. Have an awesome week, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.